What would you do for any kind of viral load you come across? And we do share those, and it is amongst us and always has been. And this one just happens to be really hard on our system. And it's definitely presenting to be more challenging to move through our immune system. And that means our immune system is having a hard time digesting this specific virus. And so there's a few topics I'm going to go into this evening. And one is that very idea in not teaching you the lymph, the river of life tonight, because I teach that so much, but really looking at immune response and what is immune response and what are the symptoms of immune response that you could be looking for that might even be prior to, oh my gosh, something is really in my system and it's getting deep. So how do we kind of catch those early immune or what are called inflammatory responses of the immune system? And what is an inflammatory response? Well, it's when your immune system is having a very hard time digesting something in your body. And so it is going to give you a siren. So I hope everybody knows this, but if you don't, we have a fire engine, we have a fire station, we have a fire engine, and then sometimes we have to put out the siren. And the siren's like, nanner, nanner. And something I want to say is, what do we do when there's a fire engine going by? We step aside. And in our human nature, when our body's fighting something and trying really hard to digest that microbe or virus, it's going to put off sirens, inflammatory responses, and it's really going to tell us it's working for us. The earliest symptom that comes is tired. So fatigue. If you're midday, you may be having other things, like you might be dehydrated, there might be other things going on, but if you just hit a wall and you know you've got ample sleep and you feel like you're doing pretty good emotionally and you just hit this like, man, I'm so tired, what happened? You should learn to investigate that and recognize that that is your inflammatory response. And the siren of our B and T cells in our immune river are actually putting us to rest, and they're putting us down to sleep so that they can forage through your river of life and can actually digest that virus or that microbe. But that fire engine has to be able to move freely through the streets. And that's why we have to kind of, whoa, maybe I should, go take a power nap if that's all you got. Or maybe I should think about doing a little breathing for 5 minutes. Or, hey, I don't know if going out to dinner with a bunch of friends tonight is really the best thing for me. And you might want to, call it a day and just go home and rest. And sometimes we have to know when to give up to rest. And so let me just say, in this pandemic, I have to say there's a couple things at our disposal that is really amazing. And one of them is rest. If we're being asked to isolate and to stay home, we can really let ourselves just be. And let's remember, we're right at the end of winter. If you haven't even gotten to hibernate yet and really just calm down and take some time and think about what's ahead you want to spring into in spring, well, this is the chance. And I talk about this a lot in a lot of arenas about how we don't trust rest anymore. We don't necessarily see a value in resting. And I do notice that a lot of my clients will, they're like, I just need 10 minutes and I feel like I'm so lazy, or I can't watch a whole movie, like I'm getting nothing done. And I have to say, I beg to differ. I am a big believer in rest. I'm someone who works as hard as anyone else. I have a major work ethic, so I can work some long hours and I'm there at people's time of need, but I also retreat and I'll, be gone for 3-5 days at a time. And one of the reasons I do that, or I'll cancel something if I really if it's not priority to someone's health, just to kind of make sure I'm staying with the day to day instead of just I said I would do it. I said I would do it. So I just want to bring that forward, that our inflammatory response needs us to rest and step aside. And we, on a huge global level, are being asked to step aside and to isolate. Now, this word isolation is a little tricky for me, because like we're not isolated. Look at us right now. We're far from isolated right now. We're hanging out, having a very deep discussion in the comfort of, our safe places. And so I just think it's an important part, and it brings a lot of time for self-care too. If you're roaming around your house, not knowing what to do, and you don't want to be on the computer anymore, and you're trying to avoid too much, TV screen time or something, please remember about nature, because that is where we are the cleanest we could possibly be. You can take a hike out in the mountains and all you did was get in your car, drive, and there is plenty of oxygen molecules in nature to be able to make sure you don't get anything. And let's remember, those trees and those plants, they're not carrying coronavirus. The ocean is not carrying coronavirus. So if you need an outlet, just, don't make a lot of stops, or don't make any stops at all, and just hightail it to that place where you can get ample oxygen and work through a little bit of your worries right now through just breathing and letting yourself be in the moment. And that can be hard to do. This is bringing up a lot of PTSD. It's bringing up a fair amount of old traumas that people have experienced that were in community relations. And that's what we're really seeing at the Dhyana Center, that people are, associating to things that have already happened in their life, even if they're not exactly the same, but times of being isolated from a group, or shunned from a group, or, had a group trauma that occurred. And so just being able to rest and reflect and be like, wow, I am so amplified. How much media am I watching? How much do I need to know hour to hour? I've been noticing I'm just checking in the morning, I'm checking in at night, and then somebody's bound to tell me something in the day, but I'm keeping my focus in the day on things that are a little bit more important than those tiny details, because it seems like we got to know every second, but in actuality, we just need those checkups so that you keep more time for you. But we do have this immune response. And so the first symptom, if you're really worried about how do I know, like that's the first thing we're talking about here. How do I know if maybe I have this, or my immune system is low, and I should be careful? So the first symptom is going to be, how tired are you? If you live a life where you have insomnia or you're exhausted, I, I want to be honest, that is usually someone that is immune jeopardized, because they don't have enough energy. And boy, do I feel for you if you have insomnia, and these situations bring that on too. But that does lower our immune system and just doesn't allow us to have the juice to handle something new coming through our body. And I mean, look at it this way: you don't have any more energy to digest anything else. Not running around with no sleep is enough to digest in a life. So immune compromised would be anyone with an autoimmune disorder, anyone living with any form of diabetes. I think that goes into family, children, pregnancy care. And then it's also going to be somebody who lives with a lot of congestion. So if you're even someone who gets really congested when you eat dairy or gluten, so please avoid them because they create congestion. But the more congestion you have in your upper sinuses or down in your neck, or that you can feel is maybe not moving, or postnasal drip, you feel a heaviness in your lungs, all of these things are going to be indicative of somebody who, if there was a virus that was airborne and it got into that mucus in your congestion, in your sinuses, then it would be able to stick longer, and it would have a moist environment to be able to be harder for your immune system to stabilize it. So think about okay, if you're just generally congested, I personally am what's called a cough-a-wet. So I run congested. I don't feel very immune compromised right now. I feel quite healthy, but I do run congested just on the regular. So I'm not eating any congested foods, and I'm making sure to do my neti pot. That's how I kind of traditionally transition from work to home anyway, because I do hey, I'm done with work. Now I'm at home, clear the story. Keep in mind that neti pot isn't just for congestion. It's also going through the pituitary on the right up through the third eye, and then down through the hypothalamus switchboard. And that's why we do even alternate breath breathing, Nadi Shodhana. But that neti pot is going right through your brain and switchboard and clearing out your sinuses at the same time. But it is called netra, netipat, netra, and neti means third eye or one eye. And so it is clearing your seats of your 12 cranial nerves. So I like to make sure I kind of leave work at work and, make sure I transition myself. But it's also one of the ways I keep myself from having congestion where I might be more prone to airborne issues. And that could even be airborne or hay fever allergies. The more mucus someone has, the more the larger their allergy responses are. So congestion is a really big part of allergies and colds and viral loads and just, what is a compromised immune system? Those would be some of the main things. Now, those are the people that need to be a little bit careful right now and really be taking some extra precaution if you want my advice on that. How would you know if you were getting this? So you may have already looked up a few symptoms. There's some primary symptoms online for coronavirus, and one is having kind of a very dry, kind of whoopy type of cough. So it's a little rattly cough, or like what they're calling a dry cough. And I agree, that seems like, what most people, what's being talked about online. I'm glad I have had no exposure to anyone with coronavirus, so I really don't know what the pulse feels like. I don't know what that viral load feels like on the pulse, and this is one of those times where I actually do not want to know. Usually I'm like, new situation, let me learn it because I will help everybody else with whatever information I can learn. But this is one of those where I'm like, yeah, I don't need to know the corona spike. I think I'm better off not, having contact with that one. But if you did have that in your system, if you had exposure, really, you want to remember you don't want to mistake it for an influenza. Influenza has more of a bloating and a gaseous and a stomach, maybe nauseous onset. And we're not seeing that with this. This is more lung specific. Because, keep in mind, you could get the flu right now, and that would really, unfortunately, that would affect a lot of people around you in fear, but it would also scare you. You'd be wondering, am I okay? And so do know that influenza is the most common one we see this time of year, going from winter to spring. And that's going to have a stomach relation and a throat relation that's different. Whereas this is more dry and cold. So this is something you should know elementally. I've been kind of looking at different viral strains by night, just to kind of look at, how does one function with, against another. And when we look up coronavirus, it really shows up as a very cold relation. And so this is a good time. We do opposites with viral load just as we do to keep ourselves healthy. So if it is surviving better in cold environments, which is what we know, we want to heat it up. You want to heat it up. Probably better to keep it a little more dry and just stay with hydration so that you don't get too dry. But, think about if you have a far infrared sauna, or what if you actually had a heating blanket and a heater or next to your fireplace, whatever you have, and then wrap yourself in a bunch of blankets and do a really deep sweat. So we know viruses don't do well in a cleansing environment. So the more you're sweating, the more you're letting out fever and you're taking the pressure off your immune system. So you want to sweat a lot, even if that's like a really hot bath or a really hot shower, if that's all you got. But usually you can wrap yourself up in a bunch of wool blankets you have, and you can just like really rest, do some, breath of fire. Where you inhale, belly in, exhale, belly out, and you just do some really deep, fast breathing. As soon as you feel a little woo, like calm that breath down. You don't have to overdo it, but it'll help you bring on a sweat. So we want to do heat applications. And that means we also want to think about warming foods. I'm pretty sure you got my cute little pesto, my little recipes, my pesty pesto and my different things I made. Just this afternoon, I was getting ready to do this, and I was like, well, I want to maybe talk about the Verde that is actually in my refrigerator right now. And I just like packed immune medicine into this Verde, because I was craving a really beautiful Verde. And nice thing about Verdes is it's a salsa when you leave it raw. And then if you cook it down and bake some roots or a piece of fish or whatever protein you do, you can also cook it with lentils, and then you actually make a chile verde sauce out of it. So you can cook it, or you can do it raw. And I just made a big blender. My whole Vitamix was pretty much full. And I just packed in all of this medicine and just kept adding more and more in. What I personally did is I just like added a bunch of burdock, and I was like, ooh, it's not overboard taste on that turmeric burdock, so let me add more. Then I mulched it down. Still can't taste too much of it. Let me add more, because flavor is important too. But I served it actually to Mary Sheila, who we were working on our edible Ayurveda together, and I fed her this Verde. And we were like, wow, we are just having this meal packed with immunity. And that's really where it's at, is like, if you're stuck at home, cook, and think about it. Not everybody's buying out the burdock and the turmeric root right now. So it's probably sitting there in the health food store, and not very many people have considered it. Just like the endives or radicchio or arugula. These are all going to be things that are warming and they're liver activating. And anytime you take care of your liver, you're taking care of your spleen. The liver's over here on the right, and then our spleen is over here on the left, right under our rib cage. And the spleen is your immune organ, and your liver's dependent on it. And so the more we think about liver, blood building liver health and warming the liver, the more you're going to be building up your B cells, your warriors, and your T cells, which is your defense system, and also what your liver and spleen manufacture, which are called your immunoglobulins. And you want your little globulins being able to, come to your rescue, and they go in and they digest everything in sight that is not serving you, or they're the ones that come and rescue you when your siren goes off. And it's kind of like, whoa, something's going on, So I'm going to finish up one piece before I move on to another topic here with this. I didn't quite really say what we're looking for beyond the lungs and that little bit of a rough, dry cough. With what if you had, been in contact with coronavirus. So the other thing that was showing up on some list online, and what I also did is I watched really closely some footage of some people who were quarantined, and I looked into the eyes and saw the skin of a few people in some of the information and the recordings on media for Italy. And I was just like watching like a hawk. My health detective comes out, and that skin, and can I see their tongue, and what did their eyes look like? And I saw some very specific things with the people that they were showing. And that was bloodshot eyes, another dry. So it looked like the eyes were pretty affected. And the lungs, and the other one was looking at bleeding gums. And so it looks like it causes more dry in the lungs, which then makes fire rise. It makes your inflammatory response rise. And so it had a little bit more like flared redding of skin, bloodshot eyes, bleeding gums. These are some of the things that were matching up according to what I've been kind of eagle-eyeing on the media, and then, reading about it itself. And so, these are some things you can think of. If this is a lungs that are dry, and if it's causing dry reactions in the upper channels, I think it's really important to stay hydrated, because if it's already going to dry us out, if you got it, you want to be as wet and hydrated as you can possibly be. So instead of trying to teach you hydration here, I am going to be doing webinars for the next week. There's one that's going to be, you'll see them soon. I think Lindsay's working on putting them up on the web right now, but I'm going to do one Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then I'm doing another 4 on, I think it is again, but you'll see the dates, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the next week. And they're just going to be same, 6:30 at night, 90-minute. And I'm just picking all these different topics that are related to fear and what are we really afraid of? And what do we do with our time at home? Because I just feel like, man, it might seem like you're stuck at home, but there is so much to be strategic about if we don't spin at home and feel stuck. And so I'll cover these, including the Trina hydration. And there is an ebook on the website too, at our store, that I just wrote. That's on the Trina hydration, which is probiotics, electrolytes, which are all your gray, mineral salts from the ocean, and essential fatty acids, raw seed oils. And those are the ways we assimilate electrolytes. We assimilate water, and essential fatty acids, we absorb water and we drive it into the cells as energy. And then probiotics are going to be the immunity of the gut, which is where pretty much everything starts. Our whole entire immune system actually starts right here in our mouth. So just starting out with, looking at what are the symptoms and how does our immune system tell us it's affected. So let's remember the value of rest and breathing. This is the other thing I thought of. There's 4 pillars to health in Ayurveda. And you know what? All 4 pillars are right at your disposal in your home while you're stuck. And that is rest, breathe, eat, and drink. Those are literally the pillars. If those are not established, that you're drinking the right amount of water and you're making sure it's absorbable, you're not just peeing it out. That's why we need those electrolytes and EFAs. And you're, getting into food routines and just making your food all about your immune system. And why not just love food in your kitchen and do the most with your kitchen, pull your spices out, try them out a little more. They've been sitting around, getting in the back of the drawers, and we can breathe. We can really work on breathing exercises to stay warmer in this cold virus. That's the breath of fire. And I want to talk about breath too, just on the level of what it is to help us stay relaxed and deal with anxiety. So first off, there is no better anti-inflammatory in the world. No plant, no food. Breath has more oxygen available to you as an anti-inflammatory than anything else I've been able to find. So we kind of poo-poo breath. We know we have to breathe. I mean, we even know it's the first thing we do and it's the last thing we do and we live in between. So it's pretty important. But I think we, it becomes so routine that we know we need to breathe that we stop making it an importance. And we make it more of a oh man, I'm not breathing again, instead of being wow, I haven't been breathing in 2 weeks. Maybe I should try it, and then you start realizing how much it makes an impact. So I just want to take one moment, and maybe everybody wants to do this with me, and let's just see if it calms us down. I have more to tell you about tonight, but let's just see if this calms us down and just how much it can regulate your core. So we have 7 chakras. We have down in the pelvis, we have the root and the sacrum below the belly button, and we have the solar plexus above the belly button, and we have the heart, and we have the throat, and we have the third eye, and we have the pineal. Now we have a gland for every one of those chakras. So we have the reproductive and the adrenals, which are the ones that are fight or flighting right now so much, and the pancreas, and the thymus, and the thyroid, and the pituitary, and the pineal. Okay? Every time we breathe, we have choice. We can realize we're stressed out, we're freaking out, we're angry, we're whatever is not working for you. And we still have to take a deep, expanding breath. So when we inhale, we actually expand out. And you don't want to control it, or it's all going to be up in the diaphragm. What you want to do is you want to just wait down the root, way down in your hips. Just wait until it just effortlessly expands into the lower part of your hips and then expands and fills up the belly with oxygen. It's also filling you up and allowing you to collect how you feel. Expanding in the diaphragm, the shoulders go back down and soft, the ears and the frontal bones go down and soft, and everything comes to the top of the head. That's your inhale. Everything's expanding from the root to the crown. From there, we get to make a decision. Was what is in me and is the container that I just expanded into and built oxygen around, is this serving me? Am I happy right now? If not, you want to blow that out and you want to just let the universe absolutely disperse of that, and just it is gone into nothingness. And you didn't feed it to your body. You just blew it out. Remember, we have, more orifices in the top of our head than anywhere else in our body. So, it can blow out your mouth, your nose, your eyes, your ears, and they say the crown chakra, so really let it move and don't take it on. And you may have to keep breathing and releasing and breathing and releasing. But when you take a deep breath and all of a sudden you have a positive thought, you have something that's really coming through, that's when we want to take that up to the top of our head and we want to exhale, and you want to send that down over the body, letting it just land down in those hips again, and just sit on it, stew on it, live in it until that breath once again comes and expands. And then how long can you keep that inhale, exhale? How long can you keep that cycling? Because I'll tell you, we live in a very privileged world here for the situation we're in. And so it's very easy for us to, and if, but, shoulda, woulda, coulda, still want this, still want that. We have to be willing to keep that positive instead of going into the ands, ifs, and buts that then take us back to these negative places, which are going to lower our immune system. And they also lower the vibration of the world. We're connected by energy. They say we're as connected as all the plants and the trees are connected by roots around the entire globe. So if the roots are all connected around us and under us, how then does that make us all connected? And so, what can I do to stay positive as I want to breed more positive? Doesn't mean I don't have issues. I'm concerned. I have to keep this place afloat. I got all kinds of stuff going on too. I'm thinking about my dad like anybody else, but what can I do to make sure that if this is a negative time, how do I put positive spins and still keep my laughter alive and keep my breath moving so that I'm really in a place where I'm coping more than surviving? And I just feel like that's an important thing, is like, how do I thrive, not just survive? And breath is the beginning of that. And so I'm just wondering, let's take a moment. Let's just do maybe, a few different couple breaths together. And I'm just going to wait for my breath. And I'm moving coronavirus as far out as I possibly can, letting it dissipate into nothingness. If I don't want to get it, I have to keep it outside of my cells. If you're having a hard time expanding your abdomen, put your hand on your abdomen and give it a little squeeze, and then move your muscles kind of against your hands. Just prompt that expansion. One more. So again, if I really want to make sure I'm dealing with the fear, I I'm really going to have to think about, what am I putting in my food and what am I drinking and how am I breathing? And I'm going to have to take the opportunity to rest. I mean, if you think about it, we don't get very many opportunities to rest. I mean, even getting ready for and coming back from a holiday, can be far from restful, even though it's what we were really looking for. So hopefully the 4 pillars of health are going to be something to really consider in this pandemic time. In this, I had mentioned something around fear factor and just what is it to be looking at the fear. And I'll be doing a piece later this week on this fear factor. And it's going to be called, what are we really afraid of? And the reason I called it that is to make us think, what is this? And so I just want to make us really consider we're afraid of dying. I mean, it really comes down to something that is deeply essential, or somebody close to us will, you know and so yes, we have fear of the finances and fear of the different things that are just amongst us, but really the bottom line is we've got some fear of death going on. And I am going to do this piece, as I mentioned, on just, how does the most of my education on death and dying is around the Tibetan book of living and dying and Tibetan theories around the inevitability of death, and that we all die in the most precious possible divine way, no matter how that is. And even if you could think of a really bad way to leave, there's still an understanding in these philosophies that it still happened in exactly as it did, because that's exactly how it happened. And so I just want to give us a little bit of this overview of, like, there's some things we just really can't control, and yet we can control by isolating. So there's things we can and we can do, and we can take measures to be smart and realistic. And I totally believe in those measures. But I also want to make sure I'm not living my life right now as if I'm going to die. And then that just puts this huge pressure on me to not fail and do it right. And oh my gosh. And then I'm like worried about every little thing. And I just want to make sure we're looking at that big perspective of, like, wow, people do leave the world every day, and we inevitably someday will go. And it's okay. I mean, if we could just sit with that, like, that's okay, because it's the truth. And I like to sit in truths, I appreciate them, and they give me a lot of grounding cord to just really face the world and face everyone's traumas. We all have them. And then I have my own. And then I share them with my partners. And then I've got 2 families, and, everyone's got all of it. And so just how do we kind of rest in the, like, okay, part of me is afraid of dying. It's okay. And what does that really mean? And it's like, maybe it's even going to bring up some things that are about, what do you want to fulfill? If you're afraid of leaving the world right now, it may be that there are things that you were here to do and get done. And it's a perfect time to stay home and hibernate on it and start just getting your yayas out, start putting some stuff on paper. I want to be this, and I want to do that, and I wanted this, and I wanted that. It's not everything that's going to become. It's just a couple days of resting in the big dream and what is missing in your life that would make you feel like you're not fulfilled if you left the world right now. And then I start organizing. Now, this is my winter plan anyway. So here we are at the very end, and we're actually getting there. But I have seasonal ways that I process every 3 months, and it's a continuum for me, whether it's a project or development of a relationship. Hibernation is about writing down your dreams and then organizing those dreams. So you just let yourself get your yayas out, I want this and that, and I wanted this and that. Okay, then start looking at all that paperwork. Sometimes when I look at what I wrote down, some of them are hilarious. I'm like, ain't gonna happen, don't have $5 million. And I'm like, wow, that was grandiose. But you know what? It was really fun to write it down. And sometimes grandiose things end up happening. You know, like I think about the Dhyana Center. I built this thing with Scott penny by penny, and talk about, you know, becoming a, you know, epic, grandiose place for so many people. It's kind of blowing me away. But it wasn't really the dream. It's what we looked at each year, and we were just like, we don't have a bathhouse. Do we do it? Somebody else gonna do it? We need it. Let's do it. And that was just what happened in hibernation. And so that's what I do with winter. And that's why I take 2 weeks off over New Year's, and I just make money. I cram time and make money real strategically. And then I take the time off and I and then I look at it and then I reduce it down. Now, this is a very important part with your time, because you have time on your hands. You're going to reduce this list down after a few days to like, what is possible? What maybe would cost nothing and it's just a little bit more time? What is a great idea and you already know 2 or 3 other people who would do that project with you? And you know, so what fits in the budget? What fits into your life this year? Because you're talking about this year's project, and who's coming along for the journey. But hibernation isn't about gathering everyone yet. So we want to sit for a couple weeks right now and get down to like 2, 3 projects or 1 big old project that you're goal orienting for the year. Say it's something brand new and it's going to take all year. Give it that year. You can achieve your goals if you keep your focus and follow through. And so then when we get into spring, we start cleaning our body, and then that's when we spring forward. That's when we start talking to those people. Hey, you want to do this project with me? What's your life look like? Oh my gosh, you're in too? And I just start building upon. But you want to keep all that to yourself for a moment, you know, and just really come down to like, what's true to you and what are you ready to do? And then in spring, a couple weeks out right now, you know, you start calling people and seeing who's in. Sometimes my project gets stopped right in its tracks. And that might be because nobody's on board with me. Sometimes my partner thinks I'm crazy and he's not on board with me. And then I have to be all, yes, that might take some of our time together. And so I have to rethink, you know, what if somebody's like, I don't have time. Well, then I'm going to assume I don't either. And I can look at that list and I can kind of look at different projects. So not everything works out. It might even be that, you know, you put it on the list next year and then it happens next year. Some things I think about for 5, 6 years before they actually happen, right? Not everything happens just boom, you know, just like that. So sometimes I go back to it. And then the things that are like, yes, 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 yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, this is working. Everything's fallen in place. Well, then it's all about summer, blossoming it and letting it really culminate, which means you got to stay with it and go into growth, not just speaking and talking, but you got to grow it. And then fall, to finish up this topic, is all about the follow through. We're falling back, and you want to fall back into fall and enjoy the harvest of what you created by following through and making sure you got all your, you know, T's crossed and your I's dotted and you've got it down. And then you get to decide if this project continues to the next year and what else can you handle this winter. And you start hibernating on what's working and not working and what do you want to do once again. But I highly suggest that you really think about the value of rest, breathe, drink, and eat in this time that you're at home, or, you know, not being able to do as much as you were doing out in the world. And really, why not set some goals, you know, and see how that plays out for the year. It looks like a lot of things are going to have to change anyway. You know, people's jobs are changing, and, you know, and just everything. So why not consider and make sure it's something that's maybe strategic for the situation at hand. You know, there's many things that you might be able to be in service of that's really needed this year. So be really creative and smart about what you think you can offer the world as you're looking at these goals. Okay, let me see what else I have on my list. So here we are in remedies, and really looking at, like, you know, you've got the handout right there. So I know I don't have to explain very much to you, But I am going to tell you some of the things that are really strategic on here. And you can see that 3 of them are the trinohydration I was speaking of. That's going to be the probiotics and the Atlantic gray salt and the EFAs. So 3 of these 7 items are actually things that are about staying hydrated, because this is a dry virus. And we're also having a much colder winter with not enough rain. And so that makes for a dry, cold is brittle. And so that puts us in a drier place for spring. So we're in a drier element, cold, drier element, and that's what this virus is looking like itself. So you're going to want to think about EFAs right now that are like sesame oil and tahini, and maybe fish oil if you do that. Those are warmer and they're more active. The fish oil is actually cooling, but it's a protein, so it's got more action. And tahini is nice and warm, but it's very easy to digest. So you'll want to be looking at those at this time. And then let's talk about a little bit about Astragalus root, because this is one that's pretty easy to find. And that's one of the reasons I chose it, but it's also such a brilliant spirit plant to me. Having, the fact that I have had immune issues. I was born with immune issues. So I've had immunity, issues my whole entire life. I am happy to tell you I have less and less every single year. So that is very cool to be 51 and to see that I have less immunity issues. I don't even think of myself having immunity issues any longer. I think back on my childhood and man, did I ever have immunity issues. And I'm very glad I wasn't diagnosed diabetic type 2, because I'm sure I was. And I'm just glad that I didn't end up, on insulin at that time and, kind of helped me to build myself back up. But I have a history, and Astragalus has been a dear, dear friend. It's not warming, but it is immune stimulating. And these are things we want right now. We want to wake up those immunoglobulins. We want to wake up the B cells and the T cells of your immune system. And we want to ignite them. But we don't want to put them like on a siren alert. So this wouldn't be exactly the time to do tons of chiles. I did put chiles in my lovely Corona Verde recipe, because it's surrounded by the cilantro and the tomatillos and all the other cooling. But you're going to want to be a little bit more minimal on the extreme hot or like high amounts of vitamin C. Not against it. Big fan. But if that's your target, those are going to be a little more siren flaring if you're sensitive, immune sensitive. And so, you just want to know that that's going to make your immune system maybe work a little bit hard right now, whereas you want to build it up. You want to build it up right now instead of put it on alert. And Astragalus is brilliant at this. I believe the dosage I put in here, in fact, it doesn't really have dosage. So let me follow through with that. So say you had Astragalus root powder, because that's going to be the easiest way to work with it. So you're going to use 2 teaspoons a day. That can be put in a soup or a stew. You could do a really light simmer, and make a tea and just drink that throughout the day. You can add the Astragalus root, make a tea with that. And then you could put your electrolytes in with the tea so that you put your salt and your Astragalus together. It's just, easy and multitasking your remedies. But Astragalus is going to be, the one that I would really say is going to not just be that immune enhancing, but it's also about building blood cells, and it's adaptogen for kidney. So that's why I picked it over other, immune stimulants, because there's so many beautiful ones. I chose this one for the fact that it really has a building block for kidneys, and our kidneys are our oceans, and our adrenal glands sit right on top of our kidneys at the waist of our body. And so, if you don't want to be running on adrenaline right now and, stressing out. In fact, let's put it this way. If your kidneys were full of ocean water, there would be no fight or flight response that your adrenals would have to come to your rescue with. So the only time our adrenals have to come to our rescue with hot, dry adrenaline, which is very, fire rises, The only time that happens is when the kidneys can't cycle their fluid. We have two kidneys and they actually do an infinity sign and cycle water. And then we uptake that as our blood pressure to our heart pumping. So kidney health is heart health. And it also is what maintains our blood pressure. If your blood pressure is maintained, then usually your lymph river and your bloodstream are actually pumping together every time you breathe and move or laugh. Please do not forget to laugh right now. This is such an important time to think about laughter yoga. That's also a great way to build your fire. And to be honest, I prefer it because, I don't know. I just think it's so fun to put my hands down to the ground and roar my body all the way up and then laugh hysterically. And just really, I turn flushed, I turn red, it's like, it is exercise if you do it over and over. And it is just a really great way to get all that inflammation rising, that fire rising. We got to put it somewhere, fire spreads if we don't put it out. I want to knock on wood on that one because I live in Sonoma County, but that's an issue in our body as well as it is in our environment. So if you don't want that fire to rise and go high and dry and flare, we have to have avenues for this fire to be extinguished and utilized. So some of that fire, you don't want to give it up and put it all out. Fire keeps us moving, keeps us active, it's cardio, keeps us alive. So that's why you want to bring in some, laughter and some, just really changing the way you utilize your home. I'm amazed at how I'm pretty healthy on the daily, but I'm clearly someone who says, like, I've had to learn to be disciplined. It is not actually supernatural for me. I've just practiced it all these years and gotten pretty good. But I'm amazed at how healthy I am when I go off on some retreat and then you come home and then you're like, oh, I didn't even know I had that pattern there. I had no idea, and then you see it. So look for your patterns in your home since you're spending time there. Where do you get trapped? What is the go-to? If you're, going to too much ice cream, you really would be doing yourself a better courtesy if you ate yogurt with some raw honey on it. Like, that kind of suffices. And if you have never put cinnamon powder and cardamom powder on yogurt with raw honey, I'm telling you, it is so brilliant and it tastes so good. But that's going to be less cold than ice cream. And it's going to be more probiotic rich because that's not what ice cream's not about probiotics, and yogurt is. And so what if you made like a, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom yogurt with that raw honey, which just, you can't go wrong with honey and bee pollen right now, local, because it has all that immuno building blocks and all that blood building too. So really raw honey should have been on my list. I know I'm using a fair amount of it. It's really it's really the only sugar I really partake in on the regular and call medicine. Okay, so few more things we're going to talk about. We are at 5:30, and I'm going to talk about a few more things on this topic. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take like a little, 5-minute break because I'm going to be going into the other topic for tonight, which is the intro to Ayurveda. And we're going to talk about, who are you in this Ayurvedic realm. But before we do that, I want to talk about something very important. I want to talk about enemas and just why are they important? And first off, it might be a very thing that is going to help you face a fear. And it makes you wonder. I say to people, they're like, God, that was so much easier than I ever imagined. And then I always say, yeah. And usually people were scared when they tried to do one for the first time. And I wonder what else you might be afraid of that's actually really easy. And people are like, oh my gosh. I'm like, yeah, because it was a lot easier than you thought it would be. So couple first enemas are full on awkward. Okay. So just get ready for that and just, again, laugh, laugh at yourself. And I'm just going to put out a couple little things that happen for people with enemas, right? They're afraid they're going to poop all over the place. And It has happened. I'm not going to lie to you. People have said that it's happened, but it's so rare that I ever hear, and I talk about them so much. If you know how many enema buckets we go through around here, it is like amazing. Oh, and I do have a new, what I'm calling the forever bucket, the forever enema bucket. It's stainless steel. The other one we have that is cheaper is a Nalgene plastic, which means it's PBA free. So at least it's a safe plastic. But I do have those. And it comes with step-by-step instructions. And if you want that, I'm sure we can make that available to you. I don't see it on my notes here, so I don't think it's in your packet, but we can make that be available. But I wrote step-by-step instructions. You just want to read them a couple times, and then you want to be in the awkwardness, but it's a 3-cup holding enema. And you're remineralizing and soaking the pan of your intestines by making a kombu seaweed tea. You really could use any kombu, any seaweed you have. But you're making a strong seaweed tea, you strain it, and then that's what you're using as your solution. And it, you know, we can hold up to 28 cups in there. So 3-cup holding enema is pretty simple. And it's just about soaking the pan and getting all the minerals and the amino acids from the seaweed, and then sloughing off what's ready to release from that nutritive base to the intestines and the colon. My favorite way of doing enemas is more 3 days in a row, and then maybe 2 weeks off. If I'm in a deep cleanse, I'll do 3 in a row, 3 off, 3 in a row, 3 off. But 3 days in a row, 2 weeks off, 3 days in a row, 2 weeks off. I would say that's probably the most standard thing that I do, because I like to see the 3 days of follow through instead of it just feeling like it was eruptive. And then I'm like, I don't want to do another one. Usually if it's not feeling so hot and you're having a hard time breathing or you're cramping, that actually is a sign that it's up against a, wall of fecal matter, and there's things in there that are eruptive, and it means you need another one. And so I do 3 days in a row so that I get a full clearing and I get full follow through. And they do bring on amazing amount of energy. The bonus of enemas is the way your skin will clear up. So that I really enjoy. It helps with skin conditions. And I feel clean. And I got to tell you, when I take steps to feel clean, I feel cleaner in the world. I feel cleaner in my communications. I feel cleaner in what I need or what I want. And it allows me to, communicate in cleaner ways. So I really love that I'm taking the seat of the intestines. In Ayurveda, intestines being clear and clean is the seat of your health. It even calms down the brain. And do remember that your intestines are right in front of your psoas muscle. Your psoas muscle is the governing muscle in the body, and it's our fight or flight. It's around the kidney and adrenals. So you have your kidney and your adrenals in the back. You have your psoas that attaches to the spine, right at your waist. And then your intestines are right in the front of that. So every time you're have a reaction, guess what your intestines do? They also do peristalsis stopping, and then they try to find their flow. Every time the intestines are messed up and having problems and they're backed up, that psoas holds too. And so then you end up with emotional responses and reactions to your physical responses and reactions. And that's, really what we look at in Ayurveda. We're always looking at the emotional and the physical as one. We don't separate them because we are a whole person. We're a whole body, and we need to map ourselves according to being a whole body. So our emotions meet our physical body. And so they're intertwined. And I like that idea. It's not more complicated to me. It feels more grounded to me because, it feels more in alignment of how my body responds when I'm having emotional issues. So last thing I'll say on this topic is really about your lymph. And I do have this essential oil blend. So I do have a blend for kids and an immunity blend that I made specific to this virus. It is more warming and active and designed according to, how this is playing out on people's health and deficiencies. So I do have those available. And I just think essential oils, they're just transdermal, straight to the blood. You're bypassing anything your gut might need. So think about what foods you eat. So you're taking care of your gut too. But how nice that those clinical grade essential oils just go right to the bloodstream and give you immediate medicine in your time of need. And, essential oils are antiseptic, every single one of them. They're almost impossible to contaminate through germs. You can contaminate them with, putting an oil in them, like carrier oil. You can contaminate them with different things, but they're actually so antiseptic that they contain their, they don't allow germs to grow. And so that, just think about that in your body and how much that helps the immune system. So essential oils really rock the immune system, and they just kind of go right to where you need them. And I love that. And then the other thing is just, hey, you're stuck at home, do some salt scrubs. If you don't know what a gua sha is, maybe look it up, or I'm going to do a little piece on that too later in the week, looking at scar tissue and tissue health with the gua sha and why do we use it for our lymph. But your lymph is in all your soft tissue, the soft of your thighs, the soft of your belly, the soft of your neck, the soft of your arms, the armpits, and the main drain is right below the clavicle. If you haven't learned this from me before, that's the main drain where it meets the blood and then gets recycled by the liver, and the nutrients is sent back to the spleen, and then it goes back out to the lymph. So I made a little dance. It's kind of like lymph, blood, liver, spleen. Lymph, blood, liver, spleen. That is what works together that makes up our immunity. Our lymph, our blood, our liver, and our spleen. That's our immune system. And it feeds out to every single place in the body. It's the most surface you have to the depths of your organs. But one of the main ways we get to it is by massage or massage tools like a gua sha, sweating, salt scrubbing, swimming, jumping up and down, any kind of cardio or breathing exercise. And then again, I'm going to just leave this topic with laughter. Please do not forget to laugh and still think that, like, whatever's going to be is going to be. We are resilient and we know what we're doing. And even when things change and we don't like it, there's usually something right behind the corner that is going to propel you, and you want to trust it's going to propel you into whatever is next. What is next in your life? So anything you can do to meet that stress level in the trust factors of moment to moment, and just, we don't know everything right now. And so we got to be able to rest and be okay with that. And then we'll face things as we go along, one moment at a time, one day at a time. So I hope this is really supporting you. I know you have your recipes also. Just remember that coronavirus runs cold. So you want to do everything more warming that you can think of. Don't overheat, but do warmer than usual. And think about the fact that our excretory has to be clean at all times. Sweat, urine, feces. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that answers some questions and helps stabilize many of us. I'm just going to take a little break, and hopefully you go do the same, but I will be no more than 5 minutes, and I'll come right back, and then we'll start our intro to Ayurveda. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay. Okay. Ready for a new topic? See what we got next here. So here we go. So what I'd like to talk about here is looking at Ayurveda. And I always start this conversation with just a tiny little story. I love being a storyteller, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. But I like starting with just a tiny little story that I do every time I do this intro. And I've been teaching this intro literally 29 years of my life, almost monthly. I've almost taught this class as many times as I have ran donation clinics, which is, well, no donation clinics. I've probably done 3 times that amount, to be honest. But I tell you this little story every time because it's the beginning of it all for me. And it just really gives you a feeling of my passion and why I wanted to find Ayurveda and just what it's really done for so many. So when I was in high school, I wanted to be a famous hair and makeup artist. So I was in cosmetology school and I was actually loving it. It was really sweet. It was the 80s. Get to cut hair in the 80s. I'm sorry, but that was the best time to do hair and makeup ever. I can rock out these haircuts right now. Too bad I don't do that for a career, I suppose. And what was going on is there was this amazing hairstylist, John, in San Jose where I lived. And I would sit, the salon was all glass windows, and I would sit outside after high school and I would just watch this man cut hair. He was amazing. And I finally got the guts to go in and I was like, hey, you need an assistant. You're busy and you do all these dynamic things and I just want to like learn from you. And he was like, well, hey, I've had assistants before, but nobody wants to work with me. And I was like, why? And he was like, because I have HIV. Nobody wants to be near my scissors. Nobody wants to be around my sweat. They don't want me touching them. And I just remember thinking at 18, actually, this is actually, it didn't start at 18 and a half. It started at a little after 17 years old. I was in junior high school. And it was just this, I remember being like, that's not right. People need to be touched. They need to be loved. They need to be cared for. They need better understanding. And if doctors can put on gloves and be safe, kind of like we're putting on gloves now, but if doctors can put on gloves and be safe, why can't I put on gloves and touch these people and make sure they're cared for and loved? I can put on a mask too, and so he was like, you better go talk to your parents, which was a good answer. And so I did. And my parents immediately, their first response was like, absolutely not. That's too much, Deanna. Come on. And I just said, this is who I want to learn from. I don't believe that you just can't be near these people. He still has clients, and I'll wear gloves. And so, anyways, my parents and I took this little sanitation class at one of the hospitals and learned how to be safe. And there I went to work in the salon. And so, as I started working with John, his health started failing him and he ended up with AIDS within about 6 months of me working with him right as I was a senior in high school. And he was really, really sick. And his partner also was HIV and was having a lot of immune problems too. And watching his partner, just kind of like, honestly, wither away without knowing what to do. And so I would go over there and I would give them massages with my gloves on, and I would make sure their hair was still cut and they looked good. And I just was really learning how to care for people while I was also learning how to cut hair and do some good hair coloring. And so when I was 18 and a half, John passed away. and I was the one that was there with him. I was the only one present in the house at the time. And he told me, "You're going to be with me when I leave the world." And I was like, "You can't plan that, right?" I was young. And he was like, "Well, I can want it. I can wish for that." And I, did think to myself, like, I don't even know if I can handle that. But there was something in me that was like, I just don't have a lot of fear of death. And I think that goes into this, topic on top of coronavirus too. I just don't have a lot of fear of that. And I feel like, what am I afraid of? Something that is just going to happen the way it's going to happen, and it's inevitable anyway. I'm just going to live life and love people. And so I saw him, and he was right. I was with him the day he left the world. I called my mom a couple hours later, and I was still there alone. And she was like, "Wait a minute, are you telling me you're sitting there like with a dead body?" And I was like, "Mom, it's John. It's not just a dead body." And she's like, "Yeah, but Deanna, you're sitting with a dead body." And I remember us having this moment of silence, not really discussing it. And my silence was like, I am so comfortable. And her silence was like, who is this person, my daughter? And it just made me realize what was really important to me. And the thing that John left me with, he left me with something that was going to be in the drawer next to his bed. And so I finally opened the drawer. It was a couple days later. There were so many people coming through, and and I opened the drawer, and it was a stack of money. It was his life savings. It wasn't tons, but I mean, it was a lot for an 18-and-a-half-year-old, and he left me a tiny little note sitting on top of that pile of money. And it said, "Choose health, not beauty." And I'll cry every single time I say this phrase in my intro. All these years, I can't even help myself, because it was a life-changing moment. It was that moment of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I need to feel beautiful. That's why I'm going into beauty. But, beauty is within. And what if health is beauty? And what if happy and health take me to feeling beautiful? Because I did not feel beautiful. And I had a lot of weight issues. I've lost about 80 pounds since high school, and was immune jeopardized. And so I was not feeling beautiful and empowered. And I was leaning to beauty, looking for my health. And it just changed everything in a moment. And so I took John's money. I had plenty of support from my parents, and they have supported me so much. But I took John's money, and I just started studying everything I could get my hands on. Aromatherapy was first I went to massage school, and I did that for John before he left, because I wanted to learn how to touch. So I was a massage therapist, a cosmetologist. I became an aromatherapist, then became a Western herbalist with Michael Tierra in Santa Cruz. And I just started studying like crazy. And when I was a little before my 21st birthday, just a little before that, I gave this woman a massage at a place in San Francisco that I was working with the HIV community, and I was at Beauty Body Wellness. And it was a spa and salon. And this Indian woman said, "You have Ayurvedic hands." And I was like, "I don't know what that is." And she was like, "It's medicine from India." And she said, "You know how China has their own medicine?" And I was like, "I kind of know." And she was like, "Yeah, India has their own medicine." And she wrote down the name of my first teacher, Dr. Labsang Rabgai. And he happens to be a Tibetan monk. So he is comes from multiple generations of Tibetan medicine, and is a refugee living in India. So he became an Ayurvedic doctor instead. And he does Tibetan Ayurveda. And he also is a monk. So I learned a lot of Buddhist philosophy, and a lot of like, what is it to integrate emotional and spiritual? Like, find out what the client's core beliefs are and speak their language. Don't try to change somebody's core belief. Don't try to change who and what they believe in their faith. Those are the things that are the structures and the sounding boards, the foundations of somebody being empowered in their life is choice. And they get to choose what they want, and you want to speak to what's going to help them make changes if they need to. You're going to have to speak their language. And how are you going to respect what they really are, foundations they have? You're going to need to respect them on that level too. And so Dr. Lobsang taught me all the diagnostics and so much of what I'll be teaching you tonight. Just how to read the skin, and he was really into birthmarks and moles. I teach this in many other classes, like my body mapping series. But how do you read the map of the face? How do you read the map of the spine? How do you read the map of the tongue? And how do you read the map of someone's energy body, their aura around them, and then how that is part of their facial structures and their speech and their languaging and their body language? And how do you really recognize who is that fiery person who's all kind of maybe a little puffed up when they're angry? I don't know anything about that one. You know what I mean? And just kind of really, engaging with their fire, or really looking at you, or really looking for answers. And how do you kind of chill out and let someone have that and recognize it, that there may be balances, balance things that come out of that. But there's also going to be the like, wow, I'm noticing this person's really fiery. And so I love Ayurveda, not only for diagnostics and figuring out about my mind, body, and spirit, and how do my core beliefs spirit, and how does my daily energy and my patterns and my life, my traumas, my everything I've experienced, and my physical genetics and what I choose to do in my lifestyle that makes up who I am physically, how do I maneuver my mind, body, spirit, and be able to map myself and really be able to do, really be your own health advocate, and start making decisions. And then when something doesn't work, like I can figure out what's going on through symptoms. And then when something isn't working and I'm really trying, well, then I know I need outside support. So one of the foundations, and I'm going to go through, what is Ayurveda? First off, it's East Indian medicine. It's a medical practice that also back in the day, and we're talking, some 6,000 years ago, it was written in text 2,000 years ago. Even back in the day, they had surgery procedures. And they even had herbal and pressure point, different types of pressure points they would use as anesthesia to put people under for surgery. And you had your ear, nose, and throat doctor, and you had your gynecologist, and you had someone who did demonic possessions, and you had someone who did toxicology and pollution control. And then you had all the people that needed body work for physical therapy. It really, and yoga, exercise, all the forms of meditation, yoga, strengthening your energy body and your physical body together. These are all things that represent Ayurveda as a medical practice. And so that's what we're really looking at here. And we're going to go through and just really learn about the three primary words everybody really knows, or at this point, it feels like everybody knows. When I started doing Ayurveda 29 years ago, I cannot tell you that I did a lot of explaining of those words. Now I can mention Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and they're like, oh, I totally know this. So I've watched it grow and be utilized in our culture, which is really cool. So we'll look at these words, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and how do you use them as a diagnostic tool. But before we get there to the nuts and bolts, the juice, of this topic, I want to make sure we're setting a global idea of medicine. And really, since Ayurveda is based on elemental medicine, I just like to make mention that whatever teachers have taught me what they know, it's been in multiple cultures, but my primary that has found me, and I have found it, has been Ayurveda and Tibetan medicine. But all of our traditional medicine from around the world, and I mean every culture I've been able to look into, like I'm studying African forms of medicine and Korean medicine right now. Those are the two I took on for the year. I usually look at a different culture's medicine and food every year of my life, so I just know more and more about the world. And every single culture I can look to, they all, about 2,000 years ago, had the same exact concept as Ayurveda. So it's bigger than just India, even if I love Indian medicine and it's a really complete medical science. So it's easy to work with in that way. But they're all elementally designed. So Native American, when I look in and have studied that, because I have some, my dad has some roots in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and my partner also is from Albuquerque. That's where we met. And so I have some Native American background in medicine. And in that, they say northeast, southwest, or they say winter, spring, summer, fall. And if I look to some of the work I've done in Mexico, they use what I use a lot, which is hot, cold, wet, dry. And then you've got Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And if you look into Tibetan medicine, it's called wind, bile, phlegm. And so you're actually looking at too much air, wind, too much fire, bile, and too much phlegm, which is congestive nature. And that's how they break down their medicine. So I just like taking that moment to be like, wow, this is bigger than one culture. It doesn't belong to anybody. Like claiming these medicines is ridiculous. They're so old. They've already just, they're rich in tradition. Nothing to even have to claim. We just get to use it. And we get to use them all, like see what works. You know, what culture are you from? You know, which culture calls you? But that is a really special thing that we can start this conversation with the idea that elemental medicine is the foundation of everything globally. And you know what else? Elements are the foundation of everything that matters and is made of matter. So ether, air, fire, water, earth. In Ayurveda, they're called the Pancha, 5, Maha, great, Bhutas, elements, the 5 great elements: ether, air, fire, water, earth. Okay. Now, some cultures took that down into 4 directions, 4 seasons, or cold, dry, hot, wet, 4 different ways of looking at symptoms in our mind, body, and spirit. And then some other cultures went down to 3 primary words, which is what happened with Ayurveda. So Ayurveda doesn't start at Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Vata, Pitta, Kapha are places where we have already been born with weaknesses and strengths, and they're places where with lifestyle and the way life is going develops weaknesses and strengths. So it's actually considered the physical aspects of this medicine, but the energetics are behind our experiences. And how do we ether, air, flow with them? And how do we take action and change things and transform it, which is our fire? And how do we then go into longevity and trusting and commitment and contentment? What an important word, which is the stability of ether and water and earth. So we have ether and air, changeable, constantly shifting, and ether and air work together almost simultaneously. You know, you have emptiness until something moves in it, and then there's wind. And that's why ether and air became the word vata, which means change. It actually means constant change. You know, they say ether is the coldest element we have. If you have a room that's empty, it's going to be colder than if you went into that room and added just a mattress, just one mattress in that room, and the temperature is going to change because that matter of the mattress absorbed that ether. There's less space in the room. So ether is cold, and wind, think of wind hitting your face over and over, you're bound to get chapped. And that's our concept of dry. So too much constant change, what we call vata, is actually cold and dry in nature. And that's even if we were going to kind of segue on to the coronavirus and kind of play this out since we merged them tonight. That's also that idea that coronavirus actually has more vata symptoms, more dehydrated, dry lung. You know, vata symptoms are more dominant, and it survives more in that cold. It survives more in the vata. So the more vata we feed it, the less we're helping ourselves out. And unfortunately, vata has main emotions that really affect it. And one of them is anxiety, which is the word of dry. And the other word of vata that is a primary, the word of cold, is fear. So ether, cold, fear. And then we have air, dry, anxiety. So fear and anxiety is so up right now, and that means vata is up right now. And we're also coming out of really cold, dry winter, which means we've had a more Vata winter than even usual, since Vata rules winter in general anyway. So we're right in that alignment, which is what is really escalating the situation that we are having going on right now, and just how, Vata resides in the body. So we want to look for fear and anxiety, and you want to try to see what you can do to not eat too much cold or too much dry food if you feel like you have more of this fear or anxiety of Vata. If I'm going to stay with my kind of overview, because I am going to take a little time tonight to just talk all Vata, all the things you need to know, and Pitta and Kapha. But if I'm going to do a nice little overview like I just did for Vata, let's talk about Pitta. So we have ether and air Vata. Now we have fire and water. Okay, so Pitta is fire and water, two elements that really need each other. And fire is considered the only element that is actually variable, meaning like you could have too much fire and you could blow through your nutrients and get inflamed, or you could have too little fire and you won't have the action, the fire you need to break down your food. Okay, so just think of it like a pot of water. If you put it in the freezer, it's going to go inert, ice, and you're going to lose the fire. And if you put a pot of water on the stove and you boil it, it's going to evaporate and steam off, and you're going to have no water left, and then that pot gets destroyed. So fire needs water. And that's where Pitta is fire and water, because also Pitta's job in the body is to assimilate and absorb. So Pitta, fire, assimilating, breaking down your food, breaking down your thoughts, breaking down your priorities. All of this takes fire action. The word of focus, by the way, Pitta means focus, focused action. So we have to assimilate, and then we have to absorb. And that means that something turned to liquid, fire and water. So you have to fire has to transform your food into liquid water. And that way we can absorb it and we can get our nutrients to all the places we need it, since we are also 60% water. And most of that is from not just what we drink, but what we put into our mouth and turn to liquid. So fire's job is assimilation, absorption. The word Pitta means focus. And it really is those fire and water elements working so simultaneously together. They're so dependent on one another. In Ayurveda, they saw once there was like a pattern or something was already affected, there's no need to chase those around separately. And they just reduce them to this one primary word, Pitta, focus. If I'm going to give you the same overview for Kapha, Kapha means nourish. Okay. And this is an interesting one, because when I have clients, it seems to me often that nobody wants to become Kapha, meaning they don't want to get overweight, or they don't want to have the depression. Some people are like, I can live with anxiety, but I can't live with depression. And I'm like, really? To me, they're both energies that don't work for us. They're just on opposites. So Kapha is this word nourish, and it is of water and earth. So this element water gets used twice, okay? And water and earth is more about flow. So think about your waterworks, the kidney oceans of the body. We have a blood vessel, which is like the riverbank, and then we have blood running through the vessel, which is the water running in the river. So when you think of Kapha, you want to think about things in a liquid form that need to get from one place to another. And we need the structure of earth for water to have a place to flow, to know where it's going. If you put a bucket of water down on a straight floor, a flat floor, and you just pour the bucket of water, it's just going to go anywhere. But if there's any little gravity pull that's more downward, that water's going to follow that. And so water always is in its best form when it has the structure of earth. And then that's what we call Kapha, the ability to be nourished, get liquid nutrients from one place to another. And it's also the word of stability, So yes, water and earth make mud. So that's an issue. And then you're going to have to stir the pot. And that's the biggest issue for Kapha. They have to keep their pot stirring. They got to not get stuck in the mud. And that's a good way for them to kind of like, whoa, I think I'm stuck in the mud again. Let me go take a walk. let me see what I can do to like do some breathing. But they are going to have to keep that water moving. And I always say it's like river restoration. They're going to have to make sure there's no dams in the river, there's no flooding back congestion, showing that things aren't getting where they need to go. And so really, when we look at this beautiful thing called the doshas in Ayurveda, they're the humors or the characteristics that we break down into. We have vata, which was the word change. We have pitta, which is the word focus. And we have the word kapha, which is nourish. So sometimes if I'm with someone brand new and I'm in clinic and I have like 20 minutes with them, I'm glad they have a lead and another practitioner and they have a team for note taking. So they're covered. But, I want to make sure that this has been established. I'll say to someone, okay, we have change, focus, nourish. We don't want too much or too little change. We don't want too much or too little fire. We don't want too much or too little nourish. We want just the right amount of those. And when something becomes too much or something becomes too deficient or too low, well, then our body tells us. And how cool that our body communicates symptoms, whether that be emotional or physical. I think it's pretty amazing that our body is a well-oiled machine and it has these abilities built into us. And it's really about us being able to say, wow, I feel cold, I feel hot, I feel wet, I feel dry, and being able to really speak the language of like, this is a vata issue. I'm too cold or dry. This is a pitta issue. I'm way too hot, or this is a kapha issue and I'm feel like I'm getting stuck in the mud and things are getting really depressed or attached. And so this is the primary way that Ayurveda set forward these really key symptoms that you can target and be able to track in your body. And then let me just tell you, to cut to the chase of what the remedies are, even if I'm going to give you great ideas, really, I could sum it up. We do the opposite. It is always going to be that you do the opposite. We do Ayurveda all day long, literally. If you get hot, you're going to take your jacket off. If you get cold, you're going to put your jacket back on. If you get thirsty, you're going to drink some water. And if you get too congested, you're going to cleanse, you're going to blow your nose, or you're going to spit, you're going to get it out. And so we actually do this opposite balancing act constantly. Okay, day to day, all day long. And then we have this balancing act that's more seasonal. Hey, it's cold outside, I need to stay warm. Oh, it's warm outside, I need to stay cool. Hey, it's really dry outside, I better stay hydrated, nourished. And spring cleaning, now's our time to say, I want to spring forward, I want to be a clean vessel. This is the time to do a cleanse. Part of my next webinar, coming up in the next week is going to be around cleansing. And how do we get started on that? And how do you bring that into your life and still be able to, live life or, go to work and not just be like thrown off by a full detox. So I have a lot of ideas on what cleansing is for spring. You can just be looking for that. Okay. So now that we've established, I love sharing there's a mantra that goes, it's very telling. And there's a mantra that goes for each dosha. Okay. And the dosha, the mantra for the dosha of Vata is, the leaf never lands in the same place twice. Constant change. Okay. So they are flexible and they are travelers and they're creative and they're all about great spirit and what is being told for them to do. And they are going to go and do it. Okay. So lots of spontaneity. But the issue for this can be, they can be overly flexible, or like the way I like to say it is, Pitta comes along and says, Vata, let's go take a walk. And they're like, okay. And then Kapha comes along to the Vata house and says, let's sit down. And the Vata goes, okay. But what did the Vata person, or when you're feeling Vata, when the leaf is never landing in the same place twice and you're just feeling thrown up in the air, because ether and air is, I can't even grab it. I cannot grab ether and air. It is not tangible. So everything is a little bit more up. And we have to learn to bring our ideas or our calm back down into our physical to be able to use Vata. So you don't just land, different place. So you have to learn how to be embodied or grounded in Vata to be able to really harness the creativity and the spiritualism that is available. Like, does Vata have some of the most brilliant ideas of anybody? And they're conscious. They're usually things that include many people. They're not going to hurt anybody ideas. There's no burning bridges in this idea. They're clean, creative ideas, but they're going to have to ground it out, and they're going to have to get their fire together and their stable kapha together to really follow through. So I'll be honest about Vata. That is not, it's not really Vata's, you know, best characteristic, I would say. Their follow through, you know. So follow through is hard for the Vata. The leaf keeps landing somewhere different. And they're so excited by wherever it lands because everything is new in the world of the ether and air, you know. So they're going to need to either have pitta and kaphas around them to help them with the project, and then they get to be the Vata. What is the Vata? They have great, brilliant ideas, but they're the seed sower. They're the networker. They're the one that you want to go buzzing around town about some event you're going to do, because they talk and talk and talk, and they share and share and share, and they know people in so many different communities. It's, you know, far and wide, and they're easy to hear because they're sweet little butterflies coming in with this little tiny seed. Oh, did you know this event is happening? Just thought I'd let you know. And then they flutter off somewhere else and tell somebody else. And they just have such an easy presence about them. Okay. And so this is so much what Vata is about. And I love to talk about the empowerment, because when we get into the full list, it's going to be negatives. I'm just going to be really honest. We're going to be all Vata has this negative, and then Pitta has these negatives, and Kapha has negatives. Ayurveda is based on looking at what is not working for you. So you have to look at your symptoms and be a truth teller to use Ayurveda. And you have to make sure that you don't judge yourself or start getting stuck in guilt and shame. Otherwise, you're going to stop yourself from taking action, and you're just going to beat yourself up. So when you're using Ayurveda, remember they're talking symptoms and weaknesses, so you can go, oh my gosh, I think that might actually be true to me. I do that. And then what's the opposite remedy that's going to start changing that pattern? So you just feel like you got more done in the world, you know, and you feel more true to yourself. Okay. Now let's, again, I'm going to keep kind of going into Vata, Pitta, Kapha, because it feels like in this video format, it's probably better for me to talk about each one so you can kind of visualize the differences as I go. So I'm going to keep doing Vata, Pitta, Kapha for each one of my topics as we go along here. So let's talk about an overview of like, oh, I have to back up. One thing I must do to set up this properly, I want to tell you the 5 main emotions for each dosha, and I'm giving you the energetic overviews. So let me just at least finish by telling you what are the 5 main emotions of Vata: anxiety, indecision, fear, hyperactivity, and guilt. Okay, so those are all a little bit like the sorry syndromes, or, you know, I'm so nervous, or like what we look for is what if worry, all the what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. And those are things that are really common, you know, for the Vata. Okay, so now I feel like I can move on to this Pitta topic. And when we look at Pitta as an energetic overview, some of the beauties of Pitta is going to be this focus makes a lot of leadership. So they're natural leaders. They are goal oriented. They're A to Z, and they may do too much themselves because they're deeply independent. So they need to work better in teams, or they need to learn to be a good leader, knows to use their team and respect their team. So they're going to have to maybe learn that, or maybe that's natural to them. But usually their projects are bigger than a one-person show. So the problem for Pitta will be they get very opinionated, or they get like, I'm so busy, I don't want to teach you anything, so I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it. But then it builds up on them, and then they're like, why do I have to do everything myself? And it's kind of like, well, you got to share, you know? So can they get a lot done in the world? Are they goal oriented? Are they smarty pants because they're of the intellectual mind? Yes. And so that makes a really good project going to happen. The issue is that you can't have too many pittas, or you're going to have too many people who just innately, naturally lead. And that can lead to some kind of riff-raff on whose project is this, da 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 da. But if you have some healthy pittas who really respect each other's minds and respect each other's goals, and you're in it together, that can be a powerhouse team too. It's just going to take a little more pitta maturity, you know, to really kind of like, okay, we're both leading. Let's like mature in our fire here and make sure we share. Okay, so the 5 main emotions for pitta are anger, resentment, which is unresolved anger, trust, judgment, and envy. Okay, now I'm going to be honest with you. I have permission from, many of my teachers, Dr. Gupta for sure, who say I can say this is envy. But when you look at Sanskrit and you translate it to English, the word is hate. And that's just such a huge, whoa, big word. But I just like to be honest, just like guilt actually translates for vata, guilt translates to shame. So I want you to think of guilt and shame in relation. And as we look at pitta, think of envy also as like, what I like to say is like breeding hate, instead of just that makes you hateful or something. But it's the breeding of hate. Anytime you have that envious, or you're outside of like, what do you have versus what does somebody else have? And envy is based on possessions. And so, we're also looking at, like, we know through history, whenever there's things that are considered, possessed, possessions of someone, there's a lot more hatred that comes from that. And a lot of wars have come out of that. So Pitta doesn't mind a little conflict. They're okay with hashing it out and doing whatever has to happen to, get to the goal. But I just think, we only need so much fire to do this. And so, they have to watch for like burning bridges or saying too much or taking over projects. These are things that a pitta is going to have to learn, since, they're going to have to work with other people eventually out in the world, So that's a little bit about pitta's energetics and the emotions of. And now we're going to look at kapha. Okay, so kapha, again, it's about nourish, water, earth. And here, those energetics are going to be the stabilizer. In a community or in a group, this is the person who's like, wait, weren't we working on this today? Like, they keep the longevity and the structure and the contentment and the stability of any project. Okay, so they may not be out there saying, hey, they may not be bringing up, big creative new ideas, but they are not forgetting what this team was about, what is the goal, and they have the long-term orientation to be able to go the distance. Because most big projects, they take more than even a year, of looking at them and creating them. They take years at a time. I mean, the Dhyana Center is going to be 25 years on November 10th this year. Can you believe that? And my relationship is actually going to be 25 years, our first date on April Fool's Day. So talk about falling in love and then starting a business. That was all 25 years ago. And I can't believe what has become what this is at this point. It's just amazing. And that's kapha. That's that longevity. They easily love, they merge, they connect, they keep things connected, they keep them loved and mothered, on a very healthy way. Okay, so kapha is all about service. The problem for kapha, okay, because I can just say all good stuff, but it has its weaknesses. So kapha, you give yourself away, you love it. Okay, you're just heart, help, help, help. And then you go in your car and it's already 8 o'clock at night and you hardly even ate. And then you're like, I deserve some chocolate cake. I'm hungry and I worked so hard. I want pizza. So what happens for kapha is they do so much service relation that they give themselves away, and they don't make really the most healthy decisions around food, and food becomes what fills them up and makes sure they're content. Okay, so yes, this makes eating disorders or overeating, this type of thing. And each one of them have different ways they get stuck in food patterns. Like pitta doesn't register food at all. in the gut. You know, they just don't even register food. They're like, no, the project has to get done. So that's going to have to wait. I'll grab something, you know? And so they don't have a real relation because they're project oriented. And sometimes Vata's so kind of a little bit more out of their body or in the ethers. They sometimes get really, really comfortable with empty. And so then they're not putting enough food in because they're more into feeling empty in their body versus feeling content and digesting with food. And so these are really the differences. And Kapha has 5 main emotions too, right? So the emotions of Kapha are depression, attachment, greed, which is like hoarding behavior also, um, grief, and melancholy, which is really not being able to get a rise of your emotions. And so it's a melancholic nature, which is like overly neutral. And sometimes when you're stuck in the mud, it'll just get into this overly neutral. I think a lot of us do it even fly by in the moment to Kapha, like, well, here we go again. That happened once again. It's kind of like you're immediately going into the muddy of like, nothing really matters anymore. And so there's just this melancholic, overly neutral, you know. So sometimes Kapha can be a little harder to get a rise out of them. They are considered to be stubborn in nature because they're stuck in the mud. So asking them to make some big changes or decisions on the fly, that's not how they roll. You know, they're more about like, ask me, give me a moment, I'll give you a yes or no, and they'll mean it. But they need time. You know, Kaphas don't do good at like pressing them or like, I need it now, you know, because they're a little bit more of that, like the water's going to get to the lake, you know, in its right time, you know, so they've got that longevity by staying really graceful and stable. Okay, so moving on, still looking at our Vata, Pitta, Kapha, we do have innate body structures. Okay, I'm not going to spend tons of time. I feel like this is such an emphasis that is a detail. So I'm not going to spend tons of time on it, but it does make sense. So it's worth the mention. If ether and air, Vata, is not even tangible and as thin as air, these people are more thin. They're naturally more either underweight or just really don't have weight issues. It's not really their thing. They have very high metabolisms and they're petite. So they're considered either really long and a little bit more of that like long and tall and thin, or they're considered very petite. They have small bones and they often have little irregular features. So like one of their eyes will be a little crooked, or the bottom lip will be fuller than the top lip, or one of their ears isn't, you know, exactly parallel to the other. And so they have these cute little quirky little details. I'm not a Vata, so I love them. I bet if you're a Vata, I don't know if you love them, but you know, our culture is comfortable with petite and being, you know, thin. And so that is one of the things that is very, you know, related to how much Vata are you willing to endure, or how dry are you willing to be in that social norm. Some people, they are innately petite and small, high metabolism. I have plenty of clients who are like, oh my gosh, my metabolism is so high, like, is there any way I could just gain a couple pounds? And so sometimes that can be a real Vata issue, even though that's not something we talk about socially. But I have learned Vata people, Pitta people, and Kapha people all have issues with their weight. You know, it's kind of the curly hair, straight hair, you know, type of thing. You know, somebody will be like, oh, I love your Kapha, I wish I had some. And I'm kind of like, I wish I could give it to you. So one of those things is, you know, something to look at. But Vata's naturally lanky or long or thin, and they don't have those weight issues. Their metabolism is just spinning like crazy at all times, and then that becomes their issue, really. And then we look at that not just as structure, because you want to think about your bone sizes. If you want to think about how much Vata, Pitta, Kapha are you born with, like think about the shape of your eyes or your nose or your lips and your bones, because those are the assessment tools we use to read your birth constitution. It's called your prakruti. And so you want to look at things that are the long-term you. The meat on your bones could be totally determined on your lifestyle and your situations of life. And so you really want to look at those constitutional pictures to see how much vata do you have from birth versus how much vata have you accumulated or become in life. Okay. And our structure, so I'll do digestion and structure together actually for each one. So I'll stay in vata here for a moment because our structure really does then become how we eat and how we fill ourselves up and how we metabolize our food. So vata has a lot of constipation issues. It might just be dry and rough and like they have to, drink warm fluids in the morning to get their bowels moving, but they know they just don't move easy on their own. And they could have full on, plaque buildup in the intestines and having some really deep compactions in the intestines that is long-term constipation. And that's all dry. If your vata runs more cold in your digestion, because people who are more petite have less skin on and layers of tissue, and that makes them more cold in the weather because there's less substance in their tissue. And so they do naturally run cold. And what that looks like is rabbit pellet stool. Still a form of constipation, but as soon as you see those little balls that come out of the stool, you know that cold has been contracting around fecal matter, and it's been contracting since cold makes so many cramping and contracted symptoms. And it actually has formed little balls of your stool instead of it being able to form into, as they say in Ayurveda, shaped like a banana. And it forms in a different way from contraction. And so rabbit pellet stool, mild constipation, all the way to a deeper issue of constipation are all things that we look at primarily in the world of vata. And it's going to be most common with people who have more petite statures. So that's how we look at that digestion and structure together. Okay, so moving on to pitta and looking at structure. So pittas are focused, right? So they have focused bone structure. So they're really like, edged, sharp edge on their shoulders. They might be a little more chiseled on their chin. They might be, really pronounced, kind of straight, directed nose. They might have a really directed gaze. But I'm going to look at those kind of like, hips that are straight, the squared off, angles of someone's bone structure tells me a little bit about how much pitta they have. Usually they have some color in their skin and they have some fire in their spirit. And so you also, just like redheads are known as pitta dominant. So, the more fire you can see by color or energy is going to tell you a lot about pitta too. But their stature is very much showing you that there is that focused, directed energy that they were born with in that angular structure. Okay. And they have a lot of muscle plastered on bone. So they have angular bones and they have very defined structure of muscle. The great thing about pitta is if they exercise, they build muscle. I mean, it's very easy for them. And if they eat the wrong food, they'll gain some weight. And then the typical pitta will be like, I'm not comfortable with this. And they'll exercise and they'll lose it. And then they'll gain a little weight and then they'll exercise and they'll lose it. But they don't gain weight easy. They only gain weight with excess food intake or more like processed food intake since they eat so much on the run. And so, they do maintain their weight pretty well. But I notice if I really talk to them about like a 10-year stretch, they're like, yeah, my metabolism's pretty good, but if I eat out, 5 days in a row while I'm traveling, I'll get a little pooch and I'll kind of feel full and I'll just like cardio, sweat, sweat, sweat. And then they'll burn all that fat off again with muscle strength and they get back to their healthy metabolism. And so really we look at like weight gain only with excess is the idea of pitta. Okay. And then when we look at kapha, we're looking at the person who just innately has a slow circulation, and they also innately have poor metabolism. So their structure really presents that things formed a little bit thicker or a little bit more low metabolism. So they're going to have bigger bones. literally. And they might be rounder in the shoulders, and they might be a little more voluptuous in that hip zone. They might even have a larger pelvis, or they might even have like what you know, innately think of as like more of a moon shaped, as they call it, the moon shaped face, the person who has a bigger head, you know, and that's going to be all kapha. They have large eyes, full lips, full bodied nose. You know, they're structured in a way that is larger and, you know, bigger boned. And so this is really innate for this kapha. If you're looking to see, have I gained, you know, some people will be like, I'm kapha, I'm kapha. And I'm like, wait, let's figure out if that's who you are constitutionally, or are we talking about that you don't like the amount of meat on your bones? Like you don't like your weight? Because kapha could be something that you could have had a trauma and you started eating yourself into a situation, you know, into a pattern, and you became kapha by your structure of tissue, but it doesn't necessarily mean you were kapha at birth. So we really do like to see how padded is that skin innately. They do have thicker skin tissue, you know, thicker padded tissue on those larger bones, which then makes them have their own innate balance. And the other thing I would say is they don't usually have a lot of fiery like inflammation in healthy kapha, meaning the rivers are flowing and everything's really healthy and it's not sitting in excess. They go really good with their fire. But as soon as kapha gets weight on them, or they get too much congestion, because it's not always about weight. They could be full of mucus, or they could be full of mucus. Think of mucus in your sinuses for a minute. That is not just going to your lungs. That is actually draining down into your stomach. It almost made it happen. And it's draining down into your stomach. And then all that mucus is having to go through the stomach, which puts out the metabolism. And then it has to move all the way through the football field of your intestines, and then it has to get out. So the wetter the stool, okay, the more it just slips right out. And I am being, you know, explicit, but, you know, we're talking about digestion too. But the more it slips right out, you know, or the more that it, you know, has mucus formed around the stool itself, or maybe you wipe and it's a little more wet, the more mucus, you know, you either ate, like gluten or dairy, or you know that you're congested and it's slow dripping down into your intestinal tract. So this is one of the issues for kapha in their digestion, is they end up with mucus that just puts the fire out. It puts the metabolic fire out. And if they don't exercise enough, which is not really natural for kapha, even though they way need it, but it's not natural. So I might need to get them, you know, doing a salt scrub. I might need to get them doing breathing, or like even just investigating themselves before I really start saying, hey, let's get some exercise and like get to this, you know. But I know inevitably it is one of the things that has just, I know for my own, I'm a pitta kapha, but for my own kapha issues, walking in the morning and getting out of the house right away was a game changer for my metabolism. I used to up and down and up and down. And now, you know, I've regulated my food more and more through the years, and I've been able to create a consistency of my metabolism. I'm not going to tell you it's perfect. And I definitely have excess weight on me that affects me and is part of my life. But I'm also a pitta kapha. It's part of what my life looks like. Like we all have something we're working on. That's mine. You know, somebody else is working on something else. Somebody else is leaving their body high and dry, and they don't know how to be embodied and stay in the comfort of their, you know, their own selves, you know, whereas kapha, they get a little too comfortable, and sometimes they are having a very big challenge being able to, you know, stir the pot and make sure they don't just get stuck in their comfortable patterns, because they end up with too many comfortable patterns, and that affects their gut. And then it affects the meat on their bones, since they're already naturally padded, you know, and that's just going to add up quicker than the other two constitutions. So whereas vata has a hard time either gaining weight or slowing their metabolism down, pitta, the one thing I didn't tell you is about stool with pitta. So the one thing with Pitta is that, think about butter in a pan. It's just a glob until there's fire on it, and then it spreads. So we have to liquefy. And unfortunately, when you have too much fire in your belly, it liquefies everything that it can find, and we end up with diarrhea, or we end up with really burning stool, or it kind of makes the anus and the outer orifice really raw, or maybe hemorrhoids, because that's inflammatory. So Pitta has more issues with these kind of burning, hot, irritated skin, or your stool's just too loose. The other one that happens to anybody, if we're going to talk about stool for a minute, how y'all feeling about that? There is one thing that happens to every single dosha that I think is an important thing with your stool to know, which is pasty stool. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to be explicit because we're going to talk about the idea of like what happens when you get like a skid mark in the toilet, which basically means your stool is too oily and it's sticking to the enamel and it can't be washed off with water because water and oil don't mix. So anytime you have that pasty stool and you're noticing it kind of sitting on the finish of your enamel in the toilet, just important to know that that's anytime you ate more saturated fat than your body was able to digest. Vata needs a lot of fats, but sometimes they'll start overeating them just because they're so good for them. They'll just eat as much as they want, or they'll start taking in too much meat intake if they do eat meat, and it'll make pasty stool. Sometimes they're happy because at least their stool's moving, but I just think it's important to look for those oils. Like as soon as I see that in the toilet, I can kind of back up in my couple last days and I can be like, oh yeah, well, I did eat some potato chips and I did go out to breakfast with a friend, and I can start tracking like, yep, I had a little more saturated fat and that didn't work for me. And so that can happen for any dosha. And I just think it's a good mention. So if you're wondering if you're breaking down your fats or not, you really could look at your stool and it will be a telltale sign on whether you're doing that or not. Okay. So let me think about a few more things that we would want to say with our time about Vata Pitta Kapha. I'd like to talk about something I don't always make a big point of because it's just in your notes, but it seems important for today's world and what's going on in the world. And I'd like to talk about where does Vata, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I am so Pitta, or I am so Vata. And by the way, we're combos. So you're not going to be just one. You're going to be one mostly, and you're going to have another one that affects you also. So we're never stuck in a box. Things change seasonally, constitutionally, but we're a combo. But know your go-tos in stress. So right now with coronavirus, for instance, the go-to for Vata is going to be insomnia and having a hard time wanting to satiate their level of anxiety. Sometimes when you have high anxiety, it's hard to like sit down. And so this really perpetuates the person having insomnia, and they might get really overactive at night, like, looking too much online or watching the news or listening or talking too much late at night, like after dinner, and it elevates the adrenals, and then you can't turn your off switch off to go to bed. So we're talking about circadian rhythms and the idea that Vata is kind of up in the ethers. So their circadian rhythms have to be set. They're not going to really set themselves. And so Vata needs to, chill out after dinner and just like take a bath and, be easy on the psyche because they're so nervous system related. And so they need to really do a lot more calming yin kind of practices in the evenings. And that's going to be because their stress comes up more when they're at nighttime spinning, and they just stayed up too late to now the adrenals have taken over. If we were going to look at stress levels with Pitta, well, Pitta's freaking out right now with coronavirus because they maybe can't go to work. And so they're kind of like, okay, how am I going to keep doing this project via a different way? And so the pressure's on for them, and they're going to have a really hard time right now working less or giving up a project or like understanding, you know, that like something was canceled. So pittas right now are not loving, you know, certain aspects of like, what, that store's closed, you know, where I can't get what I need, or like everybody's taking everything off the shelves, you know, like anyone can feel